7 days and 7 nights, Coloradans have been protesting in the streets of Denver. Heartbroken and angry about the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and all of the Black Americans before him who have died at the hands of law enforcement. Denver is under a curfew as of this minute here, 9 o'clock. That has not kept crowds out of the streets this week. Denver police had their most hands-off approach yet last night, in which they almost altogether avoided any confrontations with protesters.
Earlier today, protesters got on the ground, hands on their back, and they stayed there for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, the same amount of time a Minneapolis police officer had his knee on George Floyd's neck. About an hour later, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock joined the protesters on a march downtown, and he sat with them afterwards. Denver's police chief admits a lot of people have lost trust in his department.
Chief Paul Pazin told a virtual town hall tonight that he wants to increase police accountability. He did not say if he supports the police accountability bill that was just introduced at the legislature today to do that. 9 News reporter Jordan Chavez listened in on that town hall before heading to the streets. Jordan, you heard the chief duck a number of those questions.
Yeah, you know, Kyle and Kim, he answered a lot of things very broadly, and noticeably there were a couple of questions that he tried to steer clear of. As I talk to you about this, I want to go ahead and show you all the protesters because we are marching with them at this point. Now, after Denver police fired one officer yesterday for posting a picture in riot gear with the caption, "Let's start a riot," a question was asked about disciplining the other two officers in that photo. Chief Pazin just said that they need to do better, but he didn't say if any actions would actually be taken against those officers. He was also asked if his department learned anything from the past couple of nights as officers stayed back from protesters and the situation remained a lot more peaceful because of that. He really just thanked the protesters rather than talking about his own officers for remaining peaceful. Now, there were quite a few questions that were specific to this series of protests here. One person asked why tear gas was being used on peaceful protesters. Pazin said that was never the intent to target those protesters, and then he actually apologized to anyone that had been targeted. He said that this string of protests was a tipping point for Denver and that it had a chance to improve now, and he said that's going to involve hiring people within communities of color who know those specific neighborhoods as well as their needs. And then that Pazin also had to face the question of, you know, how his officers have responded to the protests. He said most of them have done well, but they've been overshadowed by a few.
It's disappointing that some individual actions have eroded some of the amazing work that continues, the amazing dedication that continues in an effort to keep our community safe. But if we don't hold our people accountable for their actions, then that continues.
Now, one specific incident Pazin did weigh on was of a viral video that appeared to show officers shooting pepper balls at a car with a pregnant woman inside. He did pledge that those officers will be held accountable. Kim, we are on the move. We are stopping ever so often. Currently, we are at the intersection of Curtis and it looks like 15th right now. We just passed by Union Station, Corsfield before that. Looks like we are headed towards 16th Street Mall and I imagine back to the Capitol, Kim.
Okay, well, Jordan, we will stay in touch with you. Thanks so much. And if anything happens, you'll bring it to us. Also following you on Twitter. Tonight, 9 News hosted a town hall called 9 Listens, Racism and the Road to Change. We had panelists with multiple different backgrounds weighing in on the protests and the issues they are seeing. One of our panelists, Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler with the Equity Project, addressed where she thinks Colorado is today and why she calls this the perfect storm.
I think where we are today is a space that we've not been in before. I also think this is a tipping point in our country. This is racism standing on one leg. This is the convergence of COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of racism meeting each other head to head.
And Denver Police Chief Paul Pazin also joined us on that town hall. He said marching with protesters on Monday gave him a new understanding. Activist Elizabeth Epps asked why it took him 3 days for that epiphany.
I thought that I had a little bit of understanding, but on the march that some young leaders allowed me to participate in, I saw that pain firsthand, and it really gave me a greater level of understanding.
For 3 solid days, 3 solid evenings before that march, my neighbors, myself included, were tear gassed, children were sprayed, civilians, unarmed civilians we were shot with rubber bullets, with paintball pellets. 3 days of seeing unarmed civilians endure police brutality on his watch didn't give him insight into pain, but marching with teenagers did.
So we were really frank in this conversation. You can watch the full town hall on 9news.com, the 9 News app, and YouTube channel as well.
Kim, I experienced the town hall as a viewer. You got to experience it as a participant. What struck you most?
Well, technology is a great thing, and it's sometimes frustrating because of the delays, but I will say this idea of being uncomfortable, we have to be uncomfortable with what is being said to fully understand. And I'm so grateful for Dr. Ryan Ross for kind of guiding us and leading us, but our panelists made us think, I think, on every level about where we do our business, how we think about our education, how we think about our policing, what we can do legislatively, how we care about our government, how we parent. I mean, really basic things that we should all be addressing in our life every day at this incredible crossroads.
One thing that jumped out at me, Kim, is the idea that whenever you have such a large and diverse-minded group of people who are protesting something as enormous as racial injustice and specifically police brutality, there can be a lot of different viewpoints within the crowd of people who are there protesting, and there are differing views between the panelists tonight about which approaches to take in the future. It's not simply as simple as to say, oh, here's a group of several thousand people, what do they want, as if there's a bullet point list that's being handed over.
Right. There isn't just one right answer. And I think that's what was really enlightening. And it just reminded us about why we do need to listen. We got to get engaged. We got to do something. And I think that it really was interesting how they talked about, let's be honest, Colorado and Denver, we are not a great deal of diversity here, but we are involved now. Finally, I mean, it's been hundreds of years, but we got to get everybody involved. Everybody of every color needs to get involved to really lead to change. And this has to be statewide. This can't just be a city issue or a suburban issue. This has to be statewide.
A number of folks made the point here, and you see it echoed in the protest, that you're in the fight whether you know you're in the fight or not. So consider your own actions. It was a really interesting hour, Kim, and I'm glad that we were able to put that together tonight to start some conversations. Speaking of conversations, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock joined the protesters in marching and conversation for the first time today on their 7th day in the streets. He also addressed the crowd a couple of different times. Our Mark Salinger was along with him and joins us now to talk about what some of those protesters have been voicing as concerns. Mark.
Yeah, Kyle, today's demonstrations really have felt, all in all, more like a conversation than a protest. For nearly 2 hours this afternoon, thousands of people gathered together to listen to speakers. And what was really interesting is that people who didn't agree with the speakers, they were invited up to the microphone to share their own thoughts on what was going on. Now, protest organizers say they want everyone's voice to be heard, and that was their goal today. While Mayor Hancock was speaking, some in the crowd yelled out about their disagreements, and they were allowed to come up to the microphone and share their thoughts. The mayor also commented his thoughts on Denver police officers and use of force.
Now, we know we have men and women who make mistakes, but they don't represent the majority of our police department. We will continue to fight to do what's right. Hold each other accountable. You have my word. We got work to do.
I've heard this same speech from this mayor and this council so many times that I cannot trust you anymore. There needs to be real accountability. Real accountability. And real accountability happens on the ground and in the courthouse.
Now, I asked Mayor Hancock why he hadn't come out to the protests until day 7. He says he was busy working with his office to find solutions to the problems people are protesting about, but didn't offer any specifics. Now, I want to set the scene for you right now. We just entered the curfew time, and there's still thousands of people out on the streets, on the steps of the Capitol here. But I want to paint a picture for you that it is extremely peaceful. And that's how it's been the entire day, more of a conversation again than a protest, which is, of course, in stark contrast to many other cities and scenes from many other cities that we've seen around the country. Kyle?
I mean, gee whiz, Mark. I mean, if we don't line up hundreds of riot cops in helmets and shields and stand off with people, and then they shout back and forth at one another for a while, then things stay calm. We saw that last night. We're seeing that tonight. I mean, folks kind of left to their own devices the last couple of nights appear to just want to do what you're seeing behind you. Have a conversation, be heard, talk to their friends and community members.
Exactly. And every protester, every person here that we've talked to since early this afternoon says they aren't here to get in a fight with anybody. They just want to have their voices heard, just like you said.
All right, Mark Salinger, thank you very much.
We got all four! We got all four!
The reaction from protesters in Minneapolis today when they learned all 4 officers who were there the day that George Floyd died are facing charges. They gathered at the place where Floyd was pinned to the ground when they heard the news. Derek Chauvin, the officer who put his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, is now facing a charge of second-degree murder instead of third. The other 3 officers are charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder. The criminal complaint says they either held Floyd's back or legs or stood by while Floyd pleaded that he couldn't breathe. The police department fired all 4 officers. Floyd's family said they were grateful that all officers are facing charges.
The Army sent federal troops to the streets of Washington, D.C. Then they talked about pulling them out of there. Now they are backtracking on that, thinking they'll stay. There is a prominent split in the administration between President Trump, who promised heavily armed troops in the streets, and Defense Secretary Mark Esper, who told NBC News that he does not support a military response to the protests.
Sunshine back in the 90s for Denver in June. Kind of early for that, but we did have a little rain tonight. Still tracking isolated severe storms. That radar update is just ahead.
It was a relief that finally he saw it for what it was. That 5 sheriffs murdered Marvin Booker.
Marvin Booker's family wants to reopen a case after recent comments from the mayor, but the mayor's office has since taken back those comments. And we're going to check in with Sky 9 and our crews on the ground to bring you the latest and the updates on tonight's protests. Sky 9 is giving us a view of the protests tonight. Curfew went into effect about 15 minutes ago. Doesn't matter. Folks are still out there. They're peaceful. They're marching. This is near 15th and Tremont. A good deal of them out there again for yet another night. 7 nights and distinctly quiet and peaceful, although expressing views as we want to hear. People talking loudly, sharing their views. They've been doing that very well for the last couple of nights without any problems.
Denver's district attorney says she cannot reopen the case of Marvin Booker, a man who died in custody in Denver in 2010, even though the mayor recently called it murder before backtracking. Booker's family now wants a new investigation and possibly murder charges against 5 Denver sheriff's deputies. Booker died after being restrained inside the Denver County Jail. His family believes that a chokehold and the use of a stun gun killed him. An autopsy suggested that drugs and an enlarged heart played a role in his death. Last week on Next, Mayor Michael Hancock called Booker's death a murder, and that gave the family new hope for justice. The mayor's spokeswoman then tried to walk that back yesterday.
To walk it back is politics. Unfortunately, I will hope that he will understand to get his city back under control, to get the anger out of people's hearts. He has to be true to his word and speak truth to power for what it is.
District Attorney Beth McCann said tonight that she cannot reopen the Booker case, but did not explain why she cannot do it. McCann asked a grand jury to review the case in 2017 to look for possible misconduct on the part of the deputies, not to look at homicide charges. Tonight, she said she can't discuss the grand jury proceedings because they're secret. Denver did pay out a $6 million settlement to Booker's family.
It felt more like a warm day in July than early June, with temperatures running some 10 to 15 degrees above average. And then came the thunderstorms and beautiful clouds like a work of art in the sky above Colorado today. Mark Nelson with this great shot in Centennial. And then down below, we had the beautiful spring wildflowers coming out. Our high at 92, far cry from the average of 78. Triple-digit highs in southern Colorado and a lot of snow melt in the high country, with temperatures running warm up there as well. 68 at the airport here in the backyard. Me and the Miller moths enjoying a light southeasterly breeze and relatively comfortable conditions out here. We're still tracking some strong thunderstorms on the far eastern plains extending into Nebraska and Kansas along a dry line which set up around the Lyman area, extending out to Sterling and Fort Morgan, then drifting into the Burlington area. We've had a lot of lightning. We've had some brief showers even here in the metro area. Some wind to 60 miles per hour with these thunderstorms rolling through, and hail over an inch in diameter. As this system exits, the next little weather system upstream will move in. So tomorrow shaping up to be very similar to what we saw today. The severe weather threat will shift a bit further to the north. Storm Prediction Center has Rapid City, Omaha, and Minneapolis in that area for hail producing storms. We can't rule out a garden variety thunderstorm here along the Front Range that may have a little wind and lightning with it as well. Back into the 90s we go tomorrow. 106 in Phoenix for comparison, 81 in LA, 73 in Billings, and that heat shifting into the central and southern plains states. Tonight, this line of storms exits and moves into Nebraska and Kansas. There may be 1 or 2 that redevelop on the outflow boundaries up across Fort Morgan. Skies will clear overnight. We get a mostly sunny start to the day. By 2 o'clock, a couple of foothill storms will once again track from the northwest to the east-southeast and should remain below severe weather criteria. Lows tonight will be very mild in the mid-50s for Greeley and Denver, close to 60 in Pueblo and Lamar, 40s at Aspen, Vale, Breck, Copper, and up to Steamboat, where highs will soar back into the 80s. Low 90s for Denver, Greeley, and Fort Collins tomorrow. Warmer in southern Colorado, where temperatures have been running from 95 to 100 degrees. And in the foothill areas, temperature anywhere from 66 in Winter Park to the mid-70s in Estes Park. Partly cloudy, 57. Thunderstorms are ending across the area. Clear and cool to start, and then a quick warm-up tomorrow. 83 by 11 o'clock in the morning, close to 90 by about 3 o'clock. A 20% chance of afternoon storms both Thursday and Friday, with slightly higher chance for rain from storms on Saturday. Highs in the 90s for the weekend, a hot weekend coming up. Finally, some relief Tuesday and Wednesday, cooler temperatures in the lower 70s. But with the moisture around the area, everything is so green. Look at the beautiful flowers in Boulder and in Evans today.
So we think about all the multiple issues that are weighing on people these days. Pandemic, the protests, For one woman, the parenting responsibility of raising a mixed-race child in 2020. That new mother's thoughts on the topic have been shared hundreds of times, even quoted in Forbes, and told again tonight through the lens of Next photojournalist Mike Grady.
What are we doing? Ooh, it's warm out here already. It's gonna be a hot day. I'm Gretchen Burrell. I identify as a biracial female. Uh-huh. And this is Landon, and he is also biracial male. Good job. Landon is 14 months old. I fully anticipated that Landon was going to look more like my husband than me. I thought he was going to look white. When he was first born, I remember him coming out, and I was thinking like, wow, he's here, he's beautiful, he's amazing. And then I thought, oh my gosh, he looks so much like me. He's so much darker than I thought. And then my next thought was that I was going to have the cop talk with him, and I felt bad about it initially. Say Pepper? I think all parents who have children of color, they've all had to have the cop talk with their kids, explaining what the differences in our world are for people who aren't white, and that in the event that you're confronted with police officers, you have to be extra careful that you don't seem loud, that you don't seem aggressive. I see your walking feet! I knew that because of the way that he looked, that things were going to be different for him than I had anticipated, and that someday somebody could see him as a weapon just from the color of his skin, you know. I'm hopeful that Landon can grow up in a world where he doesn't have to have the cop talk with his children. Yeah. By having these conversations and by exposing ourselves to lots of different people of lots of different colors, hopefully you can have examples of people that, just like you know a good cop, I hope that people can know a good black person so that they can also know that we're not all bad or evil or criminal. Bye-bye.
We will hear perspective on recent events from some of the young people who came out to protest when our coverage continues in the 9:30 hour. For now, we continue to watch peaceful protests on the streets of Denver for the 7th consecutive night. We are watching the crowd eastbound on Colfax at 15th as they move about the city, kneeling here and there, listening to speakers, sharing their views. Another night in the city. We'll be right back. It's interesting to watch the way that different nights have had different feels, different postures in the streets of Denver. And it's then you wind it back and you look at, say, a Saturday night when it was clear from mid-Saturday afternoon that things were going to be chippy that night. And police were shooting tear gas near District 6 headquarters off of Colfax at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The crowds were chucking stuff at them. Battle lines had formed up along Colfax there at Lincoln by 5 o'clock or so. You got days like yesterday and days like today where the tone has just been different. You don't see the cops, for starters. I mean, they're not masked up there in people's faces. And the protesters have had a different tone than what we saw the other days. I mean, and what you see is a situation that stretches on into the night in a productive fashion and in a peaceful fashion, and people are out there being heard. 27 minutes past curfew. Denver police have said that curfew is only going to be enforced against protesters in the center of the city. They're not going after people walking their dogs in the outskirts, but they're also not moving in on peaceful protesters, at least not tonight, at least not last night.
No, it's refreshing. Nice to see this tonight. And every morning, this is really wonderful. We see volunteers cleaning up downtown Denver and trying to erase some of the graffiti from the weekend protests. Hickenlooper borrowed a friend's power washer. He brought it downtown, put on a vest, and started cleaning up. He hopes cleaning up some of the vandalism will get the message back to where it needs to be.
Everybody's looking at the damage right now and forgetting sight of what really actually happened. So I said, well, if I come down here and clean some of it up, maybe we'll get focus back. Maybe people will say, you know what? We need to focus on what really happened. Not the damage, not the rioting, not the looting. Someone lost their life.
Absolutely. Protest leaders want to create accountability. They are encouraging people to stop others from painting and throwing rocks. Just be a part of the protest. We'll be right back. And here is a look at the protests on this Wednesday night as the protesters make their way back to the state capitol after going around various streets of downtown. At times they stop, they kneel, they share silent moments to remember George Floyd. They sing, they've locked arms, and there is no chaos. It is a very peaceful protest at this point. We'll keep an eye on it. That's it for 9 News at 9. But you know what? We keep going. We'll go on at 9:30. Stay with us. Taking a view from Sky 9 as the demonstrators have gathered at the state capitol. They started here in Denver last Thursday night. Kyle, as you pointed out, each protest has had a distinct personality, in part because of how the protesters and police have met. Tonight and last night seemed very calm, and everything is going just fine. These protesters say they have no sign of stopping. They're going to make their voices heard because they do want significant change on many levels following the death of George Floyd. We have seen multi-generations, people from all over coming together downtown. Sometimes they meet in the afternoon. They continue into the evening hours. Yes, there is a curfew. They're a little bit past their curfew right now, but police have not been challenging that so much the last couple of nights. So instead they've gathered, and sometimes about this time, and I think they are doing that in some cases, is they hold up their cell phone so they can share the light with one another.
The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis and some cases in Colorado have led to a police accountability bill introduced today at the state capitol. It would require body cameras and restrict the use of deadly force. Officers convicted of inappropriate use of force in one department could not then just go and get a job at another department. The proposal is already getting pushback from some law enforcement, including Larimer County's Republican Sheriff Justin Smith, who talked with me on Next.
What it felt like to me was that somebody snuck up behind you, Kyle, put a knife to your throat and said, "I'm here to negotiate," your safety. And that's literally what it felt like, because what she told us is, here's the bill, it's going to pass. If you want some changes, certainly, offer up your changes. So it really frustrated me.
The bill's sponsor, Representative Leslie Herod of Denver, responded to that knife to the throat comment, tweeting that it's more reasonable than a knee to the neck for 9 minutes until someone's dead. Sheriff Smith said that the bill removing qualified immunity, some protection for police officers, would cause those officers to choose not to intervene in many situations out of fear of getting fired or getting sued. Let's go back to downtown, and our reporter Jordan Chavez, along with photojournalist Brian Wendland, moving along, keeping an eye on the crowds tonight in Denver, listening to their messages. Jordan, do you get any distinct difference being out there 2 nights consecutively now of different themes, different tones, or is this a second showing of last night?
No, absolutely, Kyle. In fact, we're going to point the camera right this way because this is very different from last night. Again, we really noticed that protesters adjust their behaviors based on police. They were over here just blocking off Lincoln and Colfax, and protesters started to form a line, kind of seeming to challenge the police a little bit. They are starting to drive off. You hear the protesters cheering about that. In fact, some of the protesters were actually yelling at the police, and then other protesters jumped in and were kind of scolding those protesters, trying not to get them to start a confrontation. As you guys have mentioned, we are about 38 minutes past curfew. I don't know if you guys noticed this, we did not get an emergency notification for that curfew on our phones. At least nobody out here did. And there has been no announcement or alarm that we have heard in the past few nights announcing the curfew over here at Civic Center Park. So that has been different as well. Something that I want to talk about is when we got off the air last night, around about 12:30, the crowd had severely and drastically thinned out. It was just a few people left over at Civic Center Park. That was about 12:30. And police still kind of letting them do their thing. But one sentiment we had heard from a few protesters was that they were tired, they wanted to go home, but they wanted to see how police were going to react and when they were going to react. So they ended up sticking around for that. So Kyle, we definitely are seeing exactly kind of the example we just saw at the beginning of this live shot, that protesters all just continue to adjust their behavior based off police reaction, Kyle.
Jordan, on Saturday, on Friday a bit, it was pretty clear that there were some folks that were intent on trouble finding them. We saw very little of that 2 nights ago until after midnight, almost none of it last night. Did you get that sense in the crowd last night too, especially when you got down to the hardcore stragglers at the end of the night, that there were some folks that were saying, I will be here until police physically remove me?
Oh, absolutely, Kyle. We definitely heard that sentiment. In fact, we almost heard some people say that verbatim. Again, it was the people saying they wanted to stay to see what police were going to do and if they were going to do anything. And then, of course, around 1 a.m., we did see that kind of action as police started moving the crowd, the small crowd. Let me point that part out, that the size was definitely a lot smaller. But as police started moving them out, using some kind of smoke, we don't know specifically what that was that they were using, as well as pepper balls. And you know, as long as people were voluntarily leaving, they were good. But we did see at least 3 people detained, Kyle.
All right, and I believe that at the very end of the night, they said 21 arrests total. Jordan Chavez, thank you so much.
So the younger generation has a voice in all of this too. Anusha Roy got a look at the protests and the state of the country through their eyes today. They also told her what they need to feel safe.
The signs these 7-year-old brothers held in front of the Capitol are both simple and powerful.
Why are we out here today, guys?
As they try to understand a difficult lesson so young.
Because somebody got hurt, right? And we want to let people know what? What do we want to let people know? It's not okay, and making sure that there's no bias or hate inside of that conversation.
My mom wants me and my brothers to have a better future.
The kids out here today may be young, but have seen a lot, like Taylor Thompson, who's originally from Minneapolis.
My city just burned down, so it kind of hurts.
This is something that's not unfamiliar for me.
It also means they can help us keep perspective. After all, they're protesting for their future.
Stuff like this needs to be on camera too, not just the riots. I think that both should be have like an equal share on the media because they're both so important. They both have such loud impacts and voices.
When asked what they need to feel safer in their own cities, these young adults know their ask will require patience.
It is so complex, but yet it's so simple. Like, we need people to listen.
Very first step would definitely be for the government to not even apologize, but take responsibility, like voice that yes, we see police brutality, we see it's an issue and we're trying to work on it. I don't expect change in a day.
They're willing to wait and willing to help their community move in the right direction.
Show more love instead of hate. I can't really control what they do, but I can help them realize that love is stronger than hate.
I'm Mark Salinger at the state capitol, where we're coming up on the 10 o'clock hour, and there are still thousands of people out here protesting. Now, I want to paint a picture of what it's like out here. All the protesters have kind of started walking up 14th right now, and it's hard to gauge exactly how many there are, but I will say that it is a huge crowd. It's probably the largest crowd that we've seen at this time of the night. It's also extremely peaceful. The people leading it right now is a jazz band. They came in with their saxophone and their tuba, and they were playing jazz music in front of the state capitol, and everybody was dancing around. One more thing that I want to touch on really quickly is I've been out here the last 3 nights, and this is the first time that I've seen Denver police officers and Denver police cars leading the protesters and having cars out in front of the protesters. They may have done it before, but this is the first time that I've seen it. They're leading the protesters, almost guiding them through the streets, and they also have police officers behind them in police cars. Now, we've seen them in previous days blocking the roads on different side streets so that protesters would stay safe. This is the first instance tonight that I have seen Denver police officers truly leading the protest. Kim?
It's like leaving a concert at Red Rocks. That's kind of what it looks like, the crowd, and you count on the police to guide you out. Okay, 261 patients remain 261 patients remain hospitalized with COVID-19. Data from the Department of Health shows 29 people were able to go home or recover another facility in the past 24 hours. The state processed about 4,800 tests on Tuesday. The governor has encouraged anyone involved in the protest last week to get tested. The health department says if you don't have symptoms, you should wait 7 days, but go immediately if you do have symptoms. And that way you can tell everyone else that you may have been in contact with if you have the virus.
Former Governor John Hickenlooper will not get out of a subpoena to testify at his ethics hearing tomorrow. Late tonight, a Denver District Court judge declined to block the subpoena from the Independent Ethics Commission or to delay that remote video hearing scheduled for tomorrow. The former governor, in the midst of his Democratic Senate primary, has been trying to get out of testifying tomorrow. His team says that testifying remotely violates his due process rights. They brought in a top Democratic attorney from Washington, D.C. to replace Hickenlooper's taxpayer-funded attorney here in Colorado, but even he was unable to convince a court to get Hickenlooper out of testifying tomorrow. Will he show? We don't know. His team would not answer that question when asked earlier this week. We'll be right back.
I don't see racism at all in the NFL. I don't see discrimination in the NFL. You know, if the society reflected an NFL team, we'd all be great.
That was Vic Fangio yesterday addressing his stance on racial inequality, saying the pretty controversial quote that there is no racism in the NFL. Now, he walked that back today after receiving a lot of backlash, and he released this statement saying, in part, while reflecting on my comments yesterday and listening to the players this morning, I realized what I said regarding racism and discrimination in the NFL was wrong. He also went on to discuss the systemic issues within the league, which Mike Kliss says that's where Fangio made his misstep yesterday.
If you look at the hiring practices of in the league at the higher levels, at head coach, GM, and coordinator, offensive coordinator in particular, you can see that those comments were ill-advised, and he admitted mistake. He made a mistake today.
Von Miller released his statement late tonight saying he understands the anger at this current moment, but he's calling on the actual change to dismantle the systemic racism, saying he'll use his platform however necessary. For the first time ever, all 4 coaches of all of the Denver professional sports teams will sit down together to discuss this crazy sports year we've had. And Mike Malone even took over Tom's job of asking the tough questions.
And I just would love to hear how Vic, as a football coach, he's got 3 coordinators, he's got position coaches, he's got 90 players on a training camp roster. How do you handle the sheer size of that?
The Coach's Challenge will air right here tomorrow night at 6:30. CHSA met for the first time today with its newest task force to go over the new guidelines for a plan to resume sports for next season. The task force classified CHSA's 29 sports into 3 different categories: low risk, moderate risk, and higher risk, and recommended that lower risk sports can begin at the start of the 2020 school year, with CHSA gathering more data to determine a start date for the moderate and higher risk sports. At this point, the task force does not recommend CHSA move forward with the sports classified as moderate and high risk. The hope is to be able to find an opportunity to play those sports at some point later in the 2021 school year. Speaking of one of those low-risk sports, opening round of the 2020 Colorado Women's Open. All eyes on hometown-grown star Jennifer Kupcho. The Westminster native has become a big name in women's golf since winning the inaugural Augusta National Women's Amateur last spring. She was impressive today, pouring in 6 birdies on the front 9, 1 stroke off the lead at 5 under after the day. Another local to keep tabs on, recent Holy Family grad Haley Schalk. Her first competition since high school, the CU-bound golfer is hoping to make the cut out of a tough field. We'll have more coming up after this.
Sky 9 back out over the Denver Capitol, where it appears like the crowd is not shrinking in size. Perhaps even some various contingents from around the city are consolidating there at the Capitol as they continue their protests of the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and police brutality across America. Coverage continues on 9 News at 10. Seven days and 7 nights, Coloradans have been protesting in the streets of Denver, heartbroken and angry over the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis and all of the Black Americans before him who died at the hands of police. Denver is still under a rare curfew tonight. We're an hour past curfew, and the streets are packed. Denver police are employing their most hands-off approach yet. Last night, they almost entirely avoided any confrontations with protesters.
Earlier today, protesters got on the ground, hands on their back, and stayed there for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. The same amount of time a police officer in Minneapolis had his knee on George Floyd's neck. About an hour later, Denver Mayor Michael Hancock joined the protesters on a march downtown, and he sat down with them afterwards. Denver's police chief admits that a lot of people have lost trust in his department.
Chief Paul Pazin told a virtual town hall tonight that he wants to increase police accountability. He did not tell the town hall if he supports the police accountability bill that was introduced at the state legislature today. 9 News reporter Jordan Chavez listened into that town hall. And Jordan, you heard the chief duck a number of questions.
Yeah, questions that a lot of these protesters out here have been specifically asking. For one, what we saw yesterday after Denver police fired one officer for posting a picture in riot gear with the caption, "Let's start a riot." A question was asked about disciplining the other two officers in that photo, but Chief Pazin said they need to do better. However, he did not say if any actions against them would be taken. He also was asked if his department learned anything from the past couple of nights as officers stayed back from protesters and the situation remained more peaceful. He just really seemed to thank the protesters for remaining peaceful without actually addressing his officers, which we have seen a very different tone tonight as officers kind of have more of a presence here. Now, there were quite a few questions that were specific to the series of protests as well. One person asked why tear gas was being used on peaceful protesters. Payson said that was never the intent to target those protesters, and he actually apologized to anyone that had been. He said that this string of protests was a tipping point for Denver, and it was a chance to improve, and he said that that's going to involve hiring people within communities of color who know these specific neighborhoods and their needs. And then Payson also had to face the question of how his officers have responded to protests, and he said most have done well, but they're overshadowed by a few.
It's disappointing that some individual actions have eroded some of the amazing work that continues, the amazing dedication that continues in an effort to keep our community safe. But if we don't hold our people accountable for their actions, then that continues.
Now, one specific incident Payson did weigh in on was of a viral video that appeared to show officers shooting pepper balls at a car with a pregnant woman inside. He did pledge that those officers will be held accountable. Again, a very different tone tonight out here at Civic Center Park in the Capitol than we saw last night, where police really had a hands-off approach. Much different tonight, as we have seen them a lot closer to the perimeter throughout the day, Kyle.
All right, Jordan, keep an eye on things. I assume the little pops we heard back there were probably fireworks. Keep in touch with you and our other folks in the field and talk in a moment.
Tonight, 9 News hosted a town hall called 9 Listens, Racism and the Road to Change. We had panelists with multiple different backgrounds weighing in on the protests and the issues that they are seeing. One of those on the panel, Dr. Nita Mosby-Tyler with the Equity Project, addressed where she thinks Colorado is today and why this is what she calls the perfect storm.
I think where we are today is a space that we've not been in before. I also think this is a tipping point in our country. This is racism standing on one leg. This is the convergence of COVID-19 pandemic and the pandemic of racism meeting each other head to head.
Denver Police Chief Paul Payson also joined us on the town hall. He said marching with protesters Monday gave him a new understanding. Activist Elizabeth Epps asked why it took 3 days of protests for his epiphany.
I thought that I had a little bit of understanding, but on the march that some young leaders allowed me to participate in, I saw that pain firsthand, and it really gave me a greater level of understanding.
For 3 solid days, 3 solid evenings before that march, my neighbors, myself included, were tear gassed, children were sprayed, civilians, unarmed civilians we were shot with rubber bullets, with paintball pellets. 3 days of seeing unarmed civilians endure police brutality on his watch didn't give him insight into pain, but marching with teenagers did.
And you can watch that full town hall on 9news.com, the 9 News app, and YouTube channel as well.
Kim, as a participant, I was just a viewer tonight, what struck you most being part of that conversation?
So many things. The fact that we do need to be uncomfortable to address so many things when we talk about dealing with racism. It was much deeper than discussions about policing and what is happening in our local levels, but it was also about our economy and our businesses and how we choose to support them and how we parent our children and our educational system. And so really grateful to Dr. Ryan Ross, who helped guide us tonight and share his views and hopefully open our eyes a little bit about all layers that we need to think about and keep talking and keep listening.
Denver Mayor Michael Hancock joined protesters in the streets for the first time on their 7th day of marching, also addressed the crowd several times. Our Mark Salinger was along and got some insight on what the mayor heard that some of those protesters want. Mark?
Yeah, Kyle, today's demonstrations felt almost like conversations as opposed to protests. For several hours, thousands of people gathered to listen to speakers, and people who didn't agree with what the speakers were saying, they were invited to come up and take the microphone and talk for themselves and tell everybody their thoughts. Now, protest organizers say they want everyone's voice to be heard, and that was the goal today. While Mayor Hancock was speaking, some in the crowd yelled about their disagreements. They were, of course, allowed also to take the microphone and voice their opinions. The mayor commented his thoughts on Denver police officers and use of force.
Now, we know we have men and women who make mistakes, but they don't represent the majority of our police department. We will continue to fight to do what's right. Hold each other accountable. You have my word. We got work to do.
I've heard the same speech from this mayor and this council so many times that I cannot trust you anymore. There needs to be real accountability. Real accountability. And real accountability happens on the ground and in the courthouse.
Now, I asked Mayor Hancock why he hadn't come out to the protest until day 7. He says he was busy working with his office to find solutions to the problems people are protesting about, but didn't offer any specifics. Now, I want to set the scene for you here, back out live at the state capitol. People are taking a knee and raising a fist. The organizers say that they're going to have 9 minutes of silence to remember George Floyd. Just a couple of minutes ago, we had a jazz band leading the protest around the Capitol. They did a lap around it through the streets. So, Kyle, that's the vibe out here tonight, far different than we've seen on other days.
Well, Mark, I'm not sure if you've ever reported from a prayer service, but one of the most awkward things in the world is when a bunch of people are in silent reflection and a reporter is talking. So I'll just allow you to nod your head silently and conclude that report while they begin their moment of silence. Thank you, Mark Salinger.
Denver's district attorney says she cannot reopen the case of Marvin Booker, a man who died in custody in 2010. His family wants a new investigation and possible murder charges against 5 Denver sheriff's deputies. Booker died after being restrained in the Denver County Jail. His family believes a chokehold and use of a stun gun killed him. The autopsy suggested drugs and an enlarged heart played a role in his death. Last week on 9 News, Mayor Michael Hancock called Booker's death a murder, which gave his family new hope for justice. The mayor's spokesperson tried to walk that back yesterday.
To walk it back is politics. Unfortunately, I will hope that he will understand to get his city back under control, to get the anger out of people's hearts. He has to be true to his word and speak truth to power for what it is.
DA Beth McCann said tonight that she cannot reopen the case at this point. She did not explain why. She asked a grand jury to review the case in 2017 to look for possible misconduct for the deputies, not homicide charges. Tonight, she said she can't discuss the grand jury proceedings because of secrecy laws. Denver paid out a $6 million settlement to Booker's family.
George Floyd's death and police brutality cases in Colorado have led to a police accountability bill introduced at the state capitol today. It would require body cameras and restrict the use of deadly force. Officers convicted of inappropriate use of force couldn't just then get a job at another department. The proposal is already getting pushback from some law enforcement, including Larimer County's Republican Sheriff Justin Smith, who spoke with me on Next.
What it felt like to me was that somebody snuck up behind you, Kyle, put a knife to your throat and said, "I'm here to negotiate your safety." And that's literally what it felt like, because what she told us is, here's the bill, it's going to pass. If you want some changes, certainly, offer up your changes. So it really frustrated me.
Democratic Representative Leslie Herod of Denver, the bill sponsor, responded to that knife to the throat comment, tweeting that it's more reasonable than a knee on someone's neck for 9 minutes until they're dead. Sheriff Smith said that removing the protection of qualified immunity for officers could cause officers to choose not to intervene in dangerous situations out of fear that they would get fired or sued.
The crowd at the Capitol has been growing even after the curfew has passed, and now many of them holding up their cell phones with their lights on their cell phones as they honor the moments of silence following that kneeling and continue to demonstrate against the death of George Floyd.
I just thought that we were going to go to Safeway and shop, and I end up walking into a nightmare.
A father shares a scare that led to police pulling a gun on his 3 daughters. Yesterday, Broncos head coach Vic Fangio said there was no racism in the NFL. Today, America said, what? Former Governor John Hickenlooper is not getting out of a subpoena to testify at his remote ethics hearing tomorrow morning. Late tonight, a Denver District Court judge declined to delay the hearing or throw out the subpoena from Colorado's Independent Ethics Commission. Now, we don't know if Hickenlooper is actually going to show up for this ethics hearing tomorrow morning. His campaign would only tell me that they are considering their options. Consider that, less than 12 hours from the hearing time. They argue that a video hearing violates the former governor's right to due process. He's currently in the middle of the Democratic Senate primary.
A black young male with a white hoodie, and the customer that witnessed it and saw it said that this gentleman has a gun.
It started as a grocery shopping trip with his family and ended with 3 kids facing a police officer with a gun and a man from Denver restrained and questioned. Police admit it was a mix-up and no crime was committed. And now Denver police are investigating exactly what happened. And that father tells our Jennifer Meckles he believes his race was a factor in the response.
The 911 call came from Safeway, the 14th and Cremeria location.
I was wondering if we could get an officer right away over here to do a drive-by. I have another customer that has left the premises, but they reported an individual in a gray silver Cadillac who is still sitting in our parking lot, a black young male with a white hoodie, and the customer that witnessed it and saw it said that this gentleman has a gun.
Safeway says it was a black customer who asked the manager to call police. Halo cameras show police approaching a car matching the description in the parking lot, weapon drawn.
As I went outside the store, there were 2 officers present by my vehicle. I asked them why did they have guns pointed at my children, and they told me not to come any closer. And I said, why shouldn't I come any closer? Why can't I come any closer? And they said, because we got a call that you had a firearm.
That car belonged to Naphtali Israel. Inside were his stepdaughters, ages 14, 7, and 2.
We're just going to pat you down and make sure you don't have any weapons or anything like that. So
I don't have any weapons.
What is your first name, sir?
My name is Naphtali Israel.
Police restrained Israel, and they found no gun on him, and no gun in the car. Within minutes, he was released, and police realized this wasn't their guy.
We'll go check it out, see Israel. So we appreciate your cooperation. We're going to try to figure this out right now. So just thank you. Thank you for your time. We don't know what's going on. We're going to make sure it's safe and do everything as far as precautions. But all the information came out that we got match your description with this vehicle.
My girls are traumatized. You know, they've never had an encounter like that.
The couple says the girls have nightmares and require therapy after a gun was pointed at them. Police say the guns were never pointed directly at anyone, instead held in what police call a low-ready position.
We believed, based upon the report, that there was an individual in that parking lot who possessed a weapon. Didn't know why they possessed that weapon, but the fact that there's a weapon potentially present, we had to take some precautions, being ready to respond to that threat if that threat presented itself.
If it was a white male sitting in that vehicle, would he have pulled his gun so fast?
It's a question still bothering this family.
I just thought that we were going to go to Safeway and shop, and I end up walking into a nightmare.
And Denver police says it is investigating what happened and whether or not race played any role in its response. DPD credited its officers for quickly realizing the problem and using de-escalation techniques. Police do not believe the original caller made a false report or intended to cause a confrontation. Israel's attorney says they have not filed a lawsuit against Denver police. He says the department reached out to them, inviting the family to sit down with police and discuss what happened, which they want to do.
We got all four! We got all four! We got...
The reaction from protesters in Minneapolis today when they learned all 4 officers who were there the day George Floyd died are facing charges. They gathered at the place where Floyd was pinned to the ground when they heard the news. Derek Chauvin, the officer who put his knee on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes, is now facing a charge for second-degree murder instead of third. The other 3 officers are charged with aiding and abetting second-degree murder. The criminal complaint says they either held Floyd's back and legs or stood by while Floyd pleaded that he could not breathe. The police department fired all 4 officers. Floyd's family says they are grateful all the officers are facing charges. Welcome back. I'm meteorologist Kathy Sabin. Sunshine and 92 in Denver again today. Felt like a day in July instead of June. And then those afternoon thunderstorms painting the sky with clouds like this. In Centennial, a beautiful shot. Mark Nelson with that for us. And then if you look down at the surface, the spring wildflowers are everywhere. That high of 92 is way above the average of 77. But look at the 100-degree high in Lamar today. A lot of snow melt in the high country with temperatures very warm in Eagle, Aspen, and Vail. DIA coming in at 67 this hour, and here in the backyard, the Miller Moths and I are enjoying a light southerly breeze and 64 degrees at 10 o'clock. And as we look at the radar, we're tracking a line of storms that were severe earlier, producing 1 to 1.5 inch diameter hail across Kit Carson County and out toward the Burlington area. There was some heavy rain for a time and a lot of lightning, and those storms still going through Nebraska and Kansas tonight. We did see a brief shower here in downtown Denver, and things have really calmed down tonight. Tomorrow, as one system moves away, the next one's already following that one in the same path. And so we'll start off with mostly sunny skies, see the clouds increase in the afternoon, and we've got the chance of a couple of those high base gusty storms here in the city again. If we see rain, we'll count ourselves lucky. The hail, those storms appear to be well north of us tomorrow. Rapid City, Omaha, Minneapolis. Storm Prediction Center has that area of the country in the area for those severe storms. We're going to be back in the 90s again tomorrow. The heat really building through the central and southern plain states. 106 in Phoenix tomorrow, 80 in Los Angeles, and 70s to the north. So these showers and thunderstorms tracking from the northwest to the southeast move out. Skies clear. We get some mid-afternoon cloud cover, and then 1 or 2 of those storms will rumble over the city. With any luck, we'll get some rain, but probably wind and lightning again. A very mild evening. Low temperatures overnight from 55 to 60 for lower elevations, 45 to 50 up over the higher terrain, 90 in Grand Junction tomorrow, 80 in Craig, low 90s for Denver, Greeley, and Fort Collins, with mid 90s in southeastern Colorado. And we'll be monitoring the thunderstorms that develop out on the eastern plains once again. Large hail will be the biggest threat. Storms ending partly cloudy and 57 tonight. A gusty thunderstorm to the north around midnight. And then we get some sunshine to kick off our day tomorrow. Mid-afternoon cloud cover and highs way above average again. We actually have a better chance of rain from storms late Friday into Saturday, but look at the weekend highs in the 90s. Finally, some relief from the heat Tuesday and Wednesday with temperatures back in the mid 70s. The wildflowers this time of year are beautiful. Keep those pictures coming.
I don't see racism at all in the NFL. I don't see discrimination in the NFL. You know, if the society reflected an NFL team, we'd all be great.
That was Vic Fangio yesterday addressing his stance on racial inequality. Now, that was his very controversial quote that there's no racism in the NFL. Now, we backtracked that a little bit today after getting a lot of backlash. Here is his statement. He says, in part, while reflecting on my comments yesterday and listening to the players this morning, I realized what I said regarding racism and discrimination in the NFL was wrong. He also went on to discuss the systemic issues within the league, which Mike Kliss says that's where Fangio made his misstep yesterday.
If you look at the hiring practices of in the league at the higher levels, at head coach, GM, and coordinator, offensive coordinator in particular, you can see that those comments were ill-advised, and he admitted mistake. He made a mistake today.
Von Miller released his statement late tonight saying he understands the anger at the current moment, but he's calling on actual change to dismantle that systemic racism, saying he'll use his platform however necessary. For the first time ever, all 4 coaches from Denver's 4 professional teams all sat down to discuss this strange professional season we've had this year. Mike Malone even took over Tom's job of asking the tough questions.
And I just would love to hear how Vic, as a football coach, he's got 3 coordinators, he's got position coaches, he's got 90 players on a training camp roster. How do you handle the sheer size of that?
The Coach's Challenge will air right here tomorrow night at 6:30. CHASA met for the first time with its newest task force to create guidelines for a plan to finally try to reopen next season as planned. The task force classified CHASA's 29 sports into 3 categories: lower risk, moderate risk, and higher risk, and recommended that lower risk sports begin at the start of the 2020-21 school year, with CHASA gathering more data to determine a start date for the moderate and higher risk sports. At this point, the task force does not recommend CHASA move forward with sports classified at moderate and high risk. The hope is to be able to find opportunity to play those sports at some point later during the 2020 school year. Speaking of one of those low-risk sports, opening round of the 2020 Colorado Women's Open, and all eyes on homegrown star Jennifer Kupcho. The Westminster native has become a big name in women's golf since winning the inaugural Augusta Nationals Women Amateur last spring. She was impressive today, pouring in 6 birdies on the front 9. She's 1 stroke off the lead right now at 5 under. Another local to keep tabs on, recent Holy Family grad Haley Schalk. Her first competition since high school. The CU-bound golfer hoping to make the cut out of the tough field.
It's hard to, get back into the competition mode for sure, but it was good to be out here. I enjoyed it. Obviously, the competition is really crazy out here, and you definitely need to be more sharp with every shot.
We'll have updates on the Open each night, with the final round wrapping up on Friday. More 9 News after this.
One and a half hours after Denver's curfew has passed, and the crowd is still there. A cross-section of folks from our community determined to make their voices heard.
We hope that tonight will end as calmly as last night did, maybe even with no small confrontation at all. Our man Mark Salinger will be out there through the evening. Give him a follow on Twitter, Mark with a C, Salinger. We'll have continuing coverage on 9news.com as well.